Okay, so I'm going to jump right in, and I want to start talking about some of the questions that you asked regarding Oberon, right? Some of you asked or wondered, what does he mean by dividing his um, sympathy, if you will, right? Why is he, on the one hand, so unsympathetic towards his own spouse, his own partner, the queen of the fairies, Titania, when it comes to her transgression, and why, on the other, is he so, um, at least affectively sympathetic toward um, Helena's transgression and her plight as an unrequited lover? Um, I think that has to do with what Oberon constructs as patriarchal responsibility. So what I mean by that is, um, what does what does Oberon believe to be the primary function and responsibility that he has toward maintaining patriarchal order? Right. That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as asking um, if he is understanding his own responsibilities as patriarch across the spectrum of human and fairy lands or kingdoms. So that is an important distinction to keep in mind. I think he recognizes, or I would argue, Oberon recognizes different modalities of patriarchy. While understanding that patriarchal order has to be maintained, he is fully cognizant of its nuances so that he understands patriarchy to operate differently within the human context as compared to the fairy context. By no means is he trying to undo patriarchal order. If anything, I would argue Oberon is willing to be flexible in his individual ability to control his patriarchal desire. No, check that. What I'm trying to say is that Oberon is willing to appropriate the various cogs within the patriarchal wheel in order to ensure that the entire wheel, or the body that is being transported by that wheel, is functioning. And I say functioning because I don't think the play leaves us with much confidence in the restored patriarchy, right? And many of you have drawn attention to that by thinking about how the ending is so tricky and problematic. You're absolutely right. We are left with little to no faith in the peace that has been made in both human and fairy worlds, right? If for no other reason, we are disturbed by the expense at which these peaceful conclusions have been arrived at. That is what I want to draw attention to. Oberon's intention is to get these wheels to simply turn, function efficiently, maybe effectively, perhaps, but certainly just getting the cogs to get the wheel to turn, the wheel being the patriarchal wheel, is fundamentally important to Oberon's agenda, both in the human and the fairy worlds. So let us look at what he says, right? So this is Act This is Act 2, Scene 1 in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I won't name pages because I don't know what kind of pagination you're able to follow, but the scene I'm hoping for you to follow along with me is when Oberon and Puck are discussing the juice of the flower that is called love and idleness. And love and idleness, by the way, is a rather beautiful, poetic, whimsical name for what we understand to be the pansy, the flower that is the pansy, right? It has that stained look, right? So it has that tie-dye look about it, and that is what Oberon is explaining to Puck is the result of a misguided arrow, right? That injured the flower and rendered it kind of bleed a little, rendered it to bleed a little bit. It's an interesting, of course, image that he conjures, but what I would like you to do is follow along these lines, right? Where Oberon is really particular about his knowledge, his experience, what he knows but Puck doesn't know, and therefore he is the one who's in control. And that idea of Oberon knowing more than others and therefore having the ability to control others is what I would like you to keep in mind as we start distilling the idea of Oberon's patriarchal order, or the vision that he has for patriarchal order in two kind of discrepant, if related, worlds, right? So this is Act 2, Scene 1. Oberon says to Puck, "Well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury." Oh, he's saying this to Titania, right? And then he says, "My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest, since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music?" "I remember," says Puck, to which Oberon says in continuation, "That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth Cupid, all armed, a certain aim he took at a fair vessel throned by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts," and so on and so forth, right? So the parenthetical remark, "but thou couldst not," I think encapsulates Oberon's intentionality when it comes to manipulating all the characters around him, using his magic, using his knowledge, if you will, of the worlds around him, real, mythical, fairy, human, in order to establish, I would say, a status quo, right? The arrow itself is a mark of failure, and he's going to use that product of that failure in order to kind of amend the situation. Which brings me to the two situations he's faced with. Let's deal with Helena first, right? Because his sense of injustice, if you will, and I don't mean it literally, I mean it almost ironically, that his sense of injustice that he extends towards Helena, right? That he wants to correct on behalf of Helena's injustice, that she cannot do anything but experience somewhat passively, is on we might say it's almost romantic, isn't it? I mean, he's a man who is affected by what he sees, almost like the audience in a theatre, right? And that, I think, is crucial for us to remember, that he is witnessing this passively, secretly, and, he's going to try correcting it now. He is the audience with the power to abort the plot, reconstruct the plot, if you will, the way in which he would like it. And this was something which was not entirely uncommon. I mean, there were rewritings of plays by audience members of great privilege. Usually masks were the settings within which audience members performed roles and participated, usually as gods or mythical figures, not unlike Oberon or Zeus or Cupid. Maybe not Cupid. Is Cupid? Maybe not Cupid, but the Zeus figures would certainly have been very desirable because they have a godlike power, right? So Oberon is performing the role of an elite and entitled audience member who can correct the story, right? Helena says the story shall be changed because she is the one who's giving chase. She is the hunter of the Demetrius character who is, according to this narrative, being hunted by her. Whereas in the larger picture, telescopically, right, what Oberon is doing is that he is stepping away from the plot that is unfolding in front of him, and he is saying, wait a minute, I am going to correct this scene because it doesn't seem to be as attractive to me. It doesn't seem to fit the mold of erotic, comedic love as it should turn out, right? Now the question I would pose is he trying to fix this for the sake of poor Helena, as he claims he is? He's saying, like, poor devil, poor thing. Or is he doing this because Demetrius is not observing of patriarchy's requirement that a woman of Helena's worth and stature be chaste and be left chaste for her husband, right? Demetrius has threatened rape, has suggested that unless Helena goes back into town, he will be forced, just about. He doesn't say he'll be forced, but he will choose to violate her, right? Her chastity, her virginity, which is so prized. Is that what renders Demetrius a punishable man? Because he is the violator of patriarchy's tenets, that a woman's worth, her chastity, be left intact for the right man, the man who will marry her and will render her progeny legitimate, his progeny legitimate, right? Is that what he's trying to correct by correcting this situation between Helena and Demetrius? I would think that Oberon's correction of the situation involving Helena's unrequited love has a lot more to do with the fact that he's trying to correct the larger patriarchal order of the earthly world, of the human world, where legitimacy, female legitimacy specifically, is connected to virginity and chastity, respectively. Silence, obedience, and chastity, we've talked about this, but for an unmarried, unbetrothed woman, virginity would have been the symptom, if you will, of her chastity. And is that what Oberon is trying to protect? That's a question I would like you to keep in mind as you consider Oberon's intention. I will continue in my next lecture to talk about his intentions and the comedic closure.